Typically, in a weak digestion state, we're seeing one or more of those three organs really drop off in their production of their corresponding fluids. And that end result is poor breakdown of food. And then typically, what'll happen from there is digestive symptoms will show up, whether that's bloating, cramping, it can be constipation, it can be diarrhea or loose stool. And then in some cases, people have that going on. They have the weak digestion, but they just don't have as much expression of the digestive symptoms that follow that, right? It's
Hmm.
just that in the IBS, IBD world, a lot of those people are actually really experiencing that as like a symptom, ongoing symptom load they've got with that upper digestive weakness as part of it.
Welcome to Hopeful and Wholesome, the show where ambitious women come home to their bodies. I'm your host, Hope Pedraza, and I'm a functional practitioner, human design guide, and expert on all things energy, and your partner in decoding the language of your body. This is your space to reconnect with your body's wisdom, reclaim your energy, and rise into alignment in your health, your business, and your life. Because thriving isn't about pushing harder, it's about learning to listen deeper. So let's dive in because your next breakthrough starts right now. Hey y'all, welcome back to Hopeful and Wholesome. Today I have on the show Courtney Cowie. She is a certified nutrition therapy practitioner and a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner with a background in bodywork therapy and Chinese medicine. She has a master's degree in Japan studies from the University of Washington and spent 3.5 years living and studying in Tokyo, where she first experienced the healing potential of Chinese medicine and a holistic health approach. As a former swimmer, competitive swimmer, and Big Ten lightweight rower, she experienced her own gut health breakdown as a result of overtraining, overachieving, toxic exposure, nutrition deficiencies. And so she takes a practical problem-solving approach to her work, blending mind-body intuition with functional medicine. And she believes that the body's symptoms are its wisdom in action and empowers her clients to take ownership of their health through education, lifestyle changes, and natural solutions. And today we are talking all about the gut. And as the title implies, we are talking a little bit about poop today. And not like you've never heard me talk about poop today, but this is really, we are going to go deep into the real root cause of so many of your gut issues. We're talking about strange poops, no poops, too much poops. We're talking about indigestion and acid reflux and all the things that can happen in your gut, and why so often so many of these things can be brushed aside or diagnosed as some blanket diagnosis like IBS, and what we can actually do about it. Courtney is going to go deep into this gut conversation. So let's jump in.
All right, y'all, I'm here with Courtney. Courtney, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Super excited for our conversation.
And I love meeting fellow FDMPs. And so I was excited when, however, we got connected. I don't know if it was you who reached out or if you had a PR person, and I was like, oh my gosh, a fellow FDN. This is awesome.
I know.
I love
It's
it.
the best conversation because it's like speaking the same language. It's like coming
Yeah.
from the same country or something, right?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Totally. I love it. And I love the focus on gut health. And like I mentioned before I record, we talked about gut health in a variety of ways on the show, but I definitely want to dive into kind of your focus on this. But of course, I want to start out because I feel like every functional practitioner we have on the show, we've all got a story of how we got into the thing, right? So I would love
Yeah.
for you to share that first and just what got you interested in kind of the functional world, but specifically with the gut health.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll try to give you the Cliff Notes version because it's like a lifelong thing, Hope, right? So
Of course, it always is.
of course, right. Not uncommon for functional health practitioners at all. So for me, it was a gut health story, and which is kind of why I focus in that area with my work. As far back as like, oh gosh, probably like second, third grade, I was getting regular stomach aches as a kid. I was pretty healthy and active actually. Like I played soccer. I was like a YMCA kid. So cycled through like all of the activities, did swim lessons, all the stuff. Eventually got into like swim team, and soccer and swim team were kind of the two things that I stuck with through my teenage years. But like I don't remember this, but I know when I've had conversations with my parents, they would say like, yeah, you would have to like ask to get benched during soccer games because your stomach would hurt,
Oh.
right? And so that had to go back to like I would say third grade, right? And then as I got older, what I do remember is like especially being in junior high, and it could have been maybe that was about the time I was starting to like get my period. There were hormonal shifts going on. I would come home from school pretty regularly, and I just have a lot of cramping and like abdominal pain. And it felt like it was like stomach, like GI stuff. So I would lay down on like a couch or on my bed. I'd put like pressure on my belly with a pillow. And then actually that used to actually work well. It would take about 20, 30 minutes, get up, I'd feel okay. And then other than that, that was really like the main ongoing symptom I had from like my childhood through my teenage years. And in other ways, I was really healthy. So at the time, like my parents were just like, this is her quirk. We don't really know what to do about it, but it's nothing serious, right? And then as I got into my teens, I went to college and I got into like Division 1 collegiate lightweight rowing, which was super competitive and demanding. And I kind of always have had a very type A driven mindset. So I think that combination of things, lifestyle wise, just what I was doing with that athletic pursuit really took my health down like another notch. Sometime during those college years, I was starting to have like bouts of like loose stool. Like it would get kind of bad for a while and then it would get back to normal and then it would get bad again and then get back to normal. And then also what's interesting is I did study abroad a few times between undergraduate and graduate. And I do think looking back that there probably was some sort of parasitic exposure or pathogen thing that kicked this off too. And as you know, Hope, like as FDNs, this is a kind of like hidden stressor work we do with stool testing to like look and see, do we have those types of problems that might have gotten picked up? And this was so far back that, when I did finally start to get knowledgeable and get on a holistic health path and doing some self-testing, I never saw anything that really like indicated that per se, but it's not to say there wasn't that going on as well. But it kind of was like up and down through my 20s. And then I feel like the next kind of major shift with my health going a bad direction was I ended up having my first child. Again, not uncommon with things like pregnancy and hormonal shifts in women to set off some sort of like health challenge. So I think it was that. Shortly thereafter, I ended up separating from my first husband. And so there was that huge life stressor going on. And next thing I knew, and also I started a business kind of all within 1 year. It was just a lot at the time. And the next thing I knew, I was just running to the bathroom all the time. Like it was the worst level of loose stool dysfunction I'd had to that point. And it was going back to the GI doc for like the second time in my life. The first time I had gone in, they did the full workup and gave me the IBS diagnosis. They're like, we can't find anything wrong. Exactly. You know the drill, you know the story, right? It's like, yep, we did all these rare cancer tests and the colonoscopy, endoscopy, like nothing's found. But here, try this like probiotic. That should work for you. And then I think it just kind of got a little bit better after that full workup. And then, obviously some years passed and I had this huge like year with all these life stressful events happened. And then I went back in again. And that was a very frustrating experience because it was the very same GI doc I had seen years before. She kind of looked at me and she's like, I don't know why you're back. We've done all these tests. It's just IBS. And then she kind of implied like, you probably need to see a dietitian, and I think I was just starting my certification as a nutrition therapy practitioner at the time. And I'm thinking, I don't need to see a dietitian.
Like, I know what to eat. Yeah.
I know what to eat. Right. But it was just this really strong sense of gaslighting or undermining. Yes. It just did not feel good. It was like a icky feeling. I'm like, and I was already starting to contemplate, like, I don't think a conventional path is going to be the way to solve this. Like, I really feel like they're limited. There's got to be answers that doctors can't give me here. So that was what sort of set me down that path of myself personally, like going and working with a couple different nutritionists and functional health practitioners. And that did kind of get me some answers and some help. And then, of course, I became certified as an NTP eventually. But then it was really, discovering functional diagnostic nutrition, learning how to run a lot of the foundational labs and root cause testing that we do that uncovered a lot of the missing pieces where it was like, oh gosh, like, in my situation, I had toxic mold exposure. I had no idea that was a part of it. Actually, it wasn't through the labs, but a different practitioner I saw around that time ran some blood work and happened to run a Western blot. And I came back positive for that. So I had no idea that like I had tick-borne illness or Lyme exposure. So it was definitely a very long journey that took a lot of different layers and steps. But I feel like it wasn't until I was like fully down that path of doing all of the foundational dietary lifestyle things that did work a little bit. And then I'd kind of stall. It was getting into the deeper functional testing that kind of uncovered the pieces that other people were missing and definitely that the GI docs were missing, right? Like I don't even know that to this day they would put stock in faith that there's connection between toxicities and GI issues, right? Sure. So those kind of my story in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, that's so good. I'm like laughing in my head while you're sharing because there's so many parallels. I had a similar experience as a kid, I had all these stomach things, then I went to all these doctors, and then they tell me it was IBS. It's, so there's so many parallels. And so I resonate with so much of what you just shared. And the frustration with the conventional system that doesn't really have much to offer outside of, I mean, for me, it was like, they sent me to do an allergy test, like a food allergy test, which still, I don't know, whatever people have opinions on the food sensitivity test and food allergy test, that's still not getting to the root cause. Why is it happening? Like for me, it's like, okay, so I stopped eating dairy. Now what? Like, so I feel that. And I think having that functional perspective, the functional labs really does make a difference in looking at things in a completely different way. But I love what you said, the point you brought up about the life stressors. I think that is so often because I've had so many clients where, they have all these gut things going on and they say that, oh, I haven't been to a foreign country and I haven't been to, because people think that like the only way to get like, parasites, whatever, is I got to go to Mexico or, some foreign country. But you brought up such a good point, or you pointed it out that you had like these multiple life stressors one after the other. And I think just like with anything, underestimate how much stress plays a part in what's going on in our body and especially the gut. I think we can recognize like, we like stress can affect certain things. Like you might feel a certain way when we're stressed, but like having that lineup of events like really does affect the gut and the function.
Yes, I agree. Well, wholeheartedly. I would almost say of all the systems in the body, probably digestive disorders have the strongest like stress component. Or I don't even want to use the word stress because that feels very vague to me. Right? It's like
true.
It's probably more, I would say probably what's more accurate is either like small ongoing traumas or bigger T trauma types of things. And maybe I would put all autoimmune disease also in that same bucket. Like I definitely think there's a huge correlation because we could argue IBS is on that autoimmune spectrum anyhow, whether conventional medicine truly like clearly recognizes that or not. Anytime we're having dysbiosis or imbalance of the bugs in the gut, right? Like we're going to have immune system dysregulation going on. So I agree wholeheartedly with that thought.
Yeah. I know one of the things you mentioned is a term where you say weak digestion. So I'd love to kind of pull that apart and kind of the two sides of that. Like what is weak digestion versus strong digestion? Because that's another thing I think I want to say this in a nice way. Like the regular people, I was going to say like the layperson, but the regular people don't really understand the difference between what weak digestion and strong digestion. So can you kind of dissect those two and what plays a part in those?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great question. In some ways, I like to teach my clients kind of what happens when the upper GI as a whole starts to break down, right? So yeah, basically we're talking about the main upper GI organs of digestion are the stomach, the pancreas, and then the liver gallbladder in tandem, right? And so in a classic weak digestion situation, typically what we're going to see is stomach, which is responsible for producing a digestive fluid called stomach acid, right? Important for breaking down food, particularly protein, cleaving minerals, especially and vitamins as well. That will start to drop. Like the stomach acid production overall will start to drop. And if you think of it kind of like all of these organs as being these little entities that have engines that have to run well. And what does it take for an engine to run well? It takes energy in the tank, right? Like gas in the tank. Just in using the word weak, it sort of implies that there's like this deficiency in the energy available to actually make that organ run well. And typically with an organ like the stomach, what we're going to see is when it gets weak, there's an underproduction issue. And so for the stomach, typically what it shows up as low stomach acid. There's a whole rabbit hole I could go down that I won't right now. Hope about just how there's a big misnomer out there that I have to clarify a lot with people that like acid reflux is not typically a symptom of overproduction of acid, but actually underproduction of acid. So just to kind of leave that as a little teaser, but just understand that even if you're having acid reflux, that can typically be a sign that there's low stomach acid, right, happening. And then, the pancreas, same thing. It makes a digestive fluid called enzymes, right? Pancreatic enzymes, which also have to help break down the food we eat. And so just like the stomach, it'll start to kind of drop its production off in a weakened state. And then liver is responsible for making a digestive fluid called bile, which can either sometimes be underproduced, sometimes there's enough of it, but the quality gets really yucky and kind of stagnant and gummy, or in severe cases can actually become like congealed stones, right, in the gallbladder, which is the little sac that stores it. And in all of those situations, the end result is bile isn't able to flow easily and freely and work properly to break down food, specifically our fat in our food. And so typically in a weak digestion state, we're seeing one or more of those three organs really drop off in their production of their corresponding fluids. And that end result is poor breakdown of food. And then typically what'll happen from there is digestive symptoms will show up, whether that's bloating, cramping, it can be constipation, it can be diarrhea or loose stool. And then in some cases, people have that going on. They have the weak digestion, but they just don't have as much expression of the digestive symptoms that follow that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just that in the IBS, IBD world, a lot of those people are actually really experiencing that as like a symptom, ongoing symptom load they've got with that upper digestive weakness as part of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So then what does the opposite of that look like? Like, what is it like the rebuilding to get the strong digestion look like?
Yeah, well, for sure. So with all of these organs, the idea is to try to get them optimally producing their own digestive fluids on their own. Now, we could kind of argue whether or not that's achievable for some people. And I like to tell clients, especially my clients that are like middle-aged and older than that, like as you get older, the truth is like our body starts to ramp down digestive function too. So sometimes the reality is like to achieve optimal digestion, similar to like hormones postmenopausally, you're just better off having that support come in to help the body do its job. But let's just put that aside. What we're trying to do optimally is remove any stressors that might be in the way of achieving optimal, stomach acid status, pancreatic enzyme status, bile status. Sometimes it's coming from nutrient deficiencies that, there's all these different cofactors that are needed to build these fluids, and correcting that through improving the quality of the diet, getting the inflammatory foods out of the diet, and then also kickstarting the digestion with some real actual external support we can bring in to help that person break down their food. And sometimes it's coming from like hidden microbial stressors, right? So like common one we see with stomach acid production going down is some degree of overgrowth of a bacteria called H. pylori, right? Which can actually, when it's present into excess, it can start to inhibit stomach acid production. So that's kind of that like hidden layer of detective work that we like to do to try to figure out, okay, what's inhibiting or what's not here that needs to be here to build these fluids back up. But if all engines are firing, strong digestion, we'd have good acidic stomach levels, we'd have good pancreatic enzyme output, and we'd have amazing bile quality that's flowing freely and nicely and able to break down fat, right?
Yeah, for sure. And if any of my clients are listening, they are all very familiar with H. pylori. I think I've had like 95% of them I've worked with H. pylori. I'm like, sorry about you. Yeah. So I think they're all, if anybody's listening, you know about the H. pylori. Okay. No, that was a really good. Thank you for explaining that. And I like the breakdown of, because I think that's the other thing is when we talk about digestion, and I think, a lot of people, we think about the stomach and maybe we think about the intestines, but then there's these other pieces in between. Like that's not the whole digestive system. And so I like that you brought out the piece about the pancreas, the pancreatic enzymes and the bile, like all that is important because we have to break down fat, protein, and carbs are all broken down differently in the digestive system in different parts. And so I think that's the other thing is just learning that part, like how your digestive system actually works.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one of the first things I learned way back when I was getting trained as a nutrition therapy practitioner is like digestion is a north to south process, right? And so I'll still to this day tell my clients, like, you might have large intestinal symptoms, but the dysfunction could actually be starting at the level of the stomach. So we never just look at these organs in isolation. Like we really want to consider the whole chain of command here and go all the way back to the beginning, even including chewing, right? Like, are we chewing our food appropriately? Right. Because there is that mechanical breakdown process of digestion that happens even before the stomach does its work. And so, yeah, it's interesting because people don't necessarily think about that because in our modern medical world, everybody's so specialized and compartmentalized. So if you go to a GI doc, I mean, you might even have salivation issues that they might say, well, you need to go see an endocrinologist for that or something, right? Like there could be things going on, but because everybody's so like in their lane, they don't want to think outside the box. Right. That's where the work we do is different. We want to really connect those. That's right.
No, for sure. I was just having a conversation on another podcast yesterday about this. That's the thing. The conventional world is so good at compartmentalizing the body and it's go to this doctor for this and this doctor for this, when it's all freaking connected. Like this is all connected. Yes. It's all working together. And I think that is what makes the healing process for people so hard and long and arduous is like having to go to 8,000 different doctors and they're all saying something different. Well, I don't know what's going wrong with my body. Like, so yeah, I think it's important to understand that interconnectedness of it all. And the other thing I wanted to ask you, and you touched a little bit on it, but there's a lot of common symptoms, or a lot of very common gut symptoms that many would classify as normal, right? Because it's common. And me and you both know, I say this on the show all the time, normal and common are not the same thing.
Right.
And I wanted to go through a handful of these, and maybe you give just some insight on what, and of course, isn't like an end all be all, like this is the reason this is happening, but just maybe give some insight on like what is actually happening. And the first thing, because, and this, I've thought about this first because we were talking about IBS, IBD, and I told this to my husband a couple weeks ago. We were talking about, I don't know, we were talking about something with digestion. And I'm like, you don't understand what it's like to have IBS, where you're like, when I have to go to the bathroom, like I have to go now. Like this isn't like, oh, let's wait till we get down there. Like I have to go now. So this like urgency to go to the bathroom, and you only know what that's like if you've ever experienced it, and it's not fun. So what are maybe some common things that might be happening for that to cause that urgency?
Yeah. So gosh, a lot can go wrong there, but just from like a digestive weakness standpoint, probably number one thing that comes to mind is low stomach acid, right? Especially if it's the classic, you eat a meal and within an hour of eating, you're running to the bathroom, right? Like that would be a big clue, especially if when you're having a bowel movement, it's loose and you're seeing lots of undigested bits of food in this. Yes, that's a huge sign that there's low stomach acid going on. So that's a big piece. And also I would put in that same camp pancreatic enzyme production, right? Like, in fact, sometimes I have to laugh, Hope, because like prospective clients will come in and I'll start explaining how these organs work, and they'll be like, "Oh, is that like the commercial on the radio about that drug for pancreas? Like, what do they call it? Like pancreatic enzyme? I don't know what it is. Insufficiency, I think is what it is, right? Like, they actually make like commercials for these drugs nowadays that people hear in their car, like driving around. And I'm like, actually, yeah, it kind of is like that. Like we can look at that on functional stool testing, but right, like that's a big piece that, I mean, in some ways the GI docs will look at that. So that's a good thing, right? Like they will often take a look at elastase 1, which is a marker we also look at, which is a good reflection of how well the pancreas is producing enzymes. And so in that world, what they'll do is measure that. And if you're unusually low and you're having diarrhea or urgency, they'll be like, oh, this is the problem. You need pancreatic enzymes. Here's a prescription drug for that. The only trouble is often with these cases of urgency and I would say chronic loose stool, it's not just one thing, right? Sometimes the enzyme can help. In the acid part, that's a whole nother story. I feel like often there's inhibiting factors like H. pylori that have to be dealt with first before we even start to trial bringing in acid. But both of those organs play a big role in that particular problem of like running to the bathroom. Now, beyond that, the other big thing that jumps out at me is just food intolerance issues, right? Because what is the body going to do when you're constantly eating a food that it finds irritating and it's triggered? It's going to move it out as fast as possible. Yeah, because it's like, this is a toxin. We don't want this in here. And so remember, like all of these symptoms, although they're very frustrating and they're painful and they suck, it's the body's way of creating a solution for something that it's trying to resolve, right? Like it's in a sense trying to rebalance on its own. And so I agree with your statement that I don't believe food sensitivities in and of themselves are the root of any problem with a person, but they are very common and they often have to be dealt with to bring that symptom burden down, especially in the beginning. Well, we're trying to figure out what are the deeper causes of these food sensitivities. So those are probably like the most common things. And then after that, we'd be looking at hidden infections, whether they're parasitic or bacterial imbalances, even overgrowth of the commensal bacteria, right, in the small intestine. If it's hydrogen producing bacteria, can lead to a lot of IBS-D symptoms, right, where you're running to the bathroom. And a lot of that is because water isn't getting absorbed properly. Those bacteria are fermenting food. It's a lot of inflammation. And then eventually it'll, pass through. And now this person has to run to the bathroom all the time. So yeah, those are probably the common ones that come to mind.
That's such a good explanation for that. The other one that I know is so common, especially for women as we age, to your point, things start to slow down as you age, but it's bloating. know so many people deal with that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, so kind of similar crossover with those two examples. And it's this is always a hard one. It's like person to person, right? Like some
Yes, of
people are going to present
course.
more with this type of symptom, others with this
Yes.
type of symptom. But bloating for sure has an upper GI weakness. Just majority of the time when I'm looking at the context, a client comes in, they're like, I'm really bloated, I have a lot of pain. Almost always there's low stomach acid, low enzyme output. A lot of times there's bile quality issues too. And especially if bile isn't working properly, either it's not high quality or it's insufficient, that undigested fat can be really irritating to the intestines moving through. And that can cause a lot of bloating, especially. And then sometimes, even if it's pretty significant, the client or the person will have a bowel movement and it'll have like an unusually strong smell, or literally the stool, if it's formed, will float in the toilet bowl, right? Like, and those can be really strong indicators that we've got some like bile issues going on and fat is not getting broken down and absorbed very well. And then again, kind of the whole commensal overgrowth picture, that small intestinal bacteria overgrowth situation, huge with bloating, right? Like, doesn't matter what is overgrowing. It could be the hydrogen producing or the methane producing or the hydrogen sulfide producing. Like, they're going to ferment and produce a ton of gas as like this byproduct. And then that gas can't escape fast enough in a sense, right? Like, I mean, these obviously we're talking about people that have these like vulnerabilities to this in the first place. And so that's going to show up often as the bloating and the abdominal discomfort. And so, yeah. And I mean, even things like parasites could be contributed or attributed to bloating as well. So a lot of like crossover. It's just kind of more a matter of like, what are we seeing that's actually that would make sense from the data we can go find that would explain these symptoms, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was a great explanation. And I think too, so many people just deal with these things because it's, it, like you said, there's vulnerabilities to this. And for a lot of people, it's embarrassing to talk about your poop or like, I'm gassy all the time. Like these aren't conversations you really feel comfortable talking about. And I tell my clients, I'm sure you do the same, like apologize and they have to tell you certain things. I'm like, I talk about periods and poop all day. Like nothing phases me. It's fine. But it is something that I know it's hard for some people to talk about. And especially too, when like in your case, and I guess both of our cases where a lot of conventional medical doctors, not all of them, I don't want to put them all in the same category, but can kind of brush off things. Yes. And make it like it's not a big deal. Well, that really doesn't make me feel comfortable talking about this and telling you that I'm friggin' uncomfortable all day because I'm bloated and feel like I'm 6 months pregnant. Like that's just not a comfortable conversation.
For sure. Yeah. And I think with the bowel stuff, there's a certain amount of shame around that. Just from my own personal experience, right? Like it's just as much as like you would hope people are pretty open to, I mean, more and more we've got chronic disease everywhere in our population. So I just think it is becoming more common. People are a little bit more open about talking about whatever it is, whether it's joint pain or bowel issues. But there is kind of that, I don't know, that sort of like, ooh, this is kind of a disgusting problem to talk about out loud. And I think just when I've had these conversations, what kind of helps, and you probably experience this too, Hope, is like when I've been publicly sharing pieces of my story and the person coming to me already knows me as like, yeah, she's been through this. Like, this is a safe space to talk about it. And then I think sometimes it's worse in situations where the person who's reaching out doesn't have that comfort level with their close friends and family that they feel they can actually share this stuff openly, whether it's for lack of like the right type of support or maybe just the network around them aren't people that really understand this kind of struggle, but for whatever reason, right, like they feel very isolated. And so that combination of feeling isolated and then feeling shameful about it makes it very hard, I think, for people to actually open up about these issues.
100%. And the other piece I wanted to pull out on kind of on that same note is something you mentioned before, where you were saying that all of these things happening, like if you're having to rush to the bathroom because you have a food sensitivity in your body's like all of these things that are happening are these protective mechanisms that the body has. And I think that's the other important thing I always like to mention in these conversations, because yes, it can be shameful and frustrating and maddening and all the things, like dealing with all of this. But I think it's a really important piece to keep into perspective that your body isn't like hating you. Your body is literally trying to protect you. And I just think a lot of times I have to bring that, and for myself too, if I get frustrated with something my body is doing, like having that perspective. And so you can approach the healing process with a little bit more like grace and compassion and not as much judgment, because it's just trying to protect you. And it's just a matter of finding the right support and help to, help you on that journey.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And even if you think about like statistically how many decades it can take sometimes for like full-blown autoimmunity to show up
Uh-huh.
for people, right?
Yep.
Like what we don't realize until we're in the thick of the symptom struggle is the body's actually been working really hard for a long time behind the
Leading
scenes.
up to it.
Right, leading up to it before we even knew the problem was brewing. And so if you
Totally.
think about it that way, it's kind of amazing. It's kind of amazing what our bodies can handle till the point it gets to that place where the straw kind of breaks the camel's back, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I think about that all the time too, because we're exposed to, I mean, speaking of like parasites and bacteria, like we're exposed to that stuff all the time. And so if you
Yeah,
think about how many times your body has fought off things and even like,
right.
viruses and things there's toxins around everywhere. Like your body does an amazing job protecting you from a lot of things. And you're right. It's kind of this, a lot of times this compound effect that eventually just kind of crumbles. But yeah, I think we have to remember what a good job our body does of protecting us that we don't even think about it on the day to day.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so one thing I want before we wrap up, I want to say because we talked a lot about stomach acid today, and I feel like people are going to have questions like, "Well, what do I do about my stomach acid?" Like all these things we're talking about, and like the common denominator and all this is stomach acid.
Right.
So, can you give just a couple of ways people can help? And I know, like obviously, honing in on quality diet is a big one. I think that's understood. But are there other things people can do to help with the stomach acid situation?
Yeah. Okay. So this is my big caution around this one, Hope. It's like, and a mistake I've even like put this out publicly I made in my learning curve as a practitioner. One thing I would definitely not do is go to your local supplement store or co-op or whatever it is and pick up a stomach acid supplement.
Yes.
I just this far down the path, I wouldn't do that because
Agreed.
I made the mistake early on before I knew how to use functional testing and I was trained as an FDNP of doing a lot of what's called lingual neural testing. It's not muscle testing, but kind of like muscle testing. It uses neural pathways and feedback, and you end up putting like nutrients on the tongue via the taste bud receptors, and you get feedback from the body.
Mhm.
And I can't tell you how many times I would put stomach acid, low dose stomach acid. It would taste really sour, but it was okay, right? Like on the client's tongue, I would check reflex points. They would get less painful. And I'd be like, oh, you need stomach acid, and then send them on their way. And half of the time they'd come back and say, oh my God, now I'm really having full blown reflux, right?
Oh
And
gosh.
so I don't know for sure, but retrospectively, coming full circle, knowing what I know now as an FDN and running a lot of functional stool testing, I believe what was probably happening there is the body can be saying yes to something like stomach acid because it is low, but that doesn't mean it's ready for it at that point in time,
Mm-hmm.
especially if there is something like H. pylori present, where in our work, we don't want to give that if there is H. pylori because it's contraindicated. The H. pylori can actually use that to kind of neutralize and
Yeah.
in a sense fuel its own sustenance inside of the stomach. So there's definitely problems there, but if you're sort of looking for ways to support stomach acid production in a more gentle way, probably my favorite thing to use would be digestive bitters and even just bitter teas, right? Like, and these are things you can easily go to the grocery store in the natural aisle or the tea aisle and source. So whether it's like dandelion, I'm trying to think of some other ones. There's a lot of like even herbal coffee products out there
Mhm.
that like chicory root, right? That could be a problem though if you've got overgrowth. So not that all of these products are going to work well, but even if you have access to a local co-op and you want to just go see what they carry in supplements, like that would be something that I would feel pretty good about safely recommending to try because it's very adaptive. With a lot of herbs, they're going to kind of gently support the body's ability to make these fluids, but they're not going to be such a strong push that if you've got something like H. pylori present,
Right.
you're going to fall into major problems. So
Right.
like bitters are really, really great. I've had people sometimes do like a little bit of apple cider vinegar or lemon juice, right? Like 20, 30 minutes before a meal. And with the bitters, ideally same idea, or with the bitter teas, you would want to drink them roughly 20 to 30 minutes to start to promote that stomach acid before you eat. And with the apple cider vinegar and the lemon juice, like generally those are pretty okay too. But if you do have a lot of gastric inflammation or H. pylori, present and you don't know it, especially with the apple cider vinegar, if it's a lot of it, I found that can kind of exacerbate symptoms
Mhm.
too. So I guess what I'm saying is even if you do decide to try one of these things and it doesn't go well, right? Like you get bad feedback from your body, like more acid reflux or stomach pain or something, that could be a strong clue you've got microbial imbalances. And that could be a clue that you might want to work with somebody qualified to help you get to the bottom of it to really kind of get the answers you're looking for. Because I think if those things aren't going well and you're dealing with a lot of other symptoms on top of that, it's probably a layered enough problem that you're going to want to do some testing to really get clear answers on what's going on. So that would kind of be my answer to that question.
No, I love that answer. This is a good answer. And I think all of those are safe enough to try to be able to get that feedback where you're not totally throwing your body into like a tailspin where you're like worse off than you were before. So I think that's great. A great answer. And of course, I mean, the GI map is one of my foundational labs that I use, so I can't recommend that one enough. So it's all about, knowing what's actually going on and not guessing.
Yeah.
So, okay. I love this conversation. This is so helpful and so insightful for just, again, like I said, these common things that we brush off as common, but they don't have to be common.
Exactly.
And before we wrap up, I have one more question I want to ask you, but can you let everybody know where they can find out more about you, maybe working with you and talking with you about all the gut things?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, I have a free e-guide if you're struggling particularly with IBS-D or IBD symptoms, right? So that kind of urgency, loose stool stuff we've been talking about throughout this episode. You can find that by going to bit.ly/overcome IBS. So it's there, it's pretty easy. And then otherwise, my website is a good place to connect with me. So it's just my first and last name, CourtneyCowie.com. If you land there, you'll see my email. You can reach out. I do offer like a free call if that's something that you're interested in. But for sure, the guide is a really great starting point, especially if you want a safe and gentle way to start to work with some of these symptoms at home and test drive, can I make some adjustments myself and see some improvement here? Like that's hands down, like my best methodology that I've used and then shared with my clients.
Yeah, love that. Of course, all the links to that will be in the show notes. So I can go check out Courtney and check out her site and get that freebie. Super helpful. Okay, the last question I want to ask that I ask everybody as we wrap up. What do you think is the most important thing you can do to live with purpose?
Live with purpose. I love that. My answer is going to be keep your schedule the way you want it, meaning like have a conscious mindset about how you want to be spending your times. I think just being a lifelong athlete and a very goal-oriented person, for me, especially as I'm getting older now, I'm in my 40s, if you can believe that, I'm realizing kind of how fast time is passing and how it's the one resource we can't buy, right? Yeah. Like when it's gone, it's gone. And so I think when you think about purpose, like to me, it's really kind of living every moment to the fullest in a sense, like making sure that how you're spending your time at the end of the day felt like it was worthwhile and meaningful. And to the extent that we have control over a good part of our day, that's just really become like a weekly habit for me, like every Friday to sit down and look at my coming week and like ask myself, like, okay, in my work life, like what are the top things I need to get done this week? In my personal life, like what is important to do this week, right? And, best you can find the balance. But I just think that although some people who are more free flow and creative might think it's not a good idea to be structured and organized and plan your time, like I would actually argue living your life that way to me feels more purposeful and allows me to be more impactful, whether it's with my kids or with my business or whatever. So that would be my answer to that question.
I love that answer. It's so good. And I think you're right. I think, and it is, my husband and I have had this conversation so many times, especially once you have kids, it's like life goes in fast forward. And you always hear like, the old people always say, oh, time goes by so fast. But once you get there, you're like, it really does. It just goes by faster. And you're right. It's the one thing you don't get back is time. And so I resonate with that answer so much. And it's such a beautiful answer. And I think it's being intentional with your time I think that's the most important thing you can do. It's, you got one life and a limited amount of time. So what are you going to do with
100%.
it? Yeah.
Yes.
I love that answer. Thank you so much, Courtney. This was so good. And I know there was so many takeaways. People are going to go be checking out their poop and figuring out what's going on. So this is so good. Get your stool test, y'all. And yeah, thanks for sharing your time with us, Courtney. This is so good.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, Hope.